Typically, when people start talking about classics of anime these days, they're talking about new modern classics, classics in the making, or Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. But today, we're taking a look at an actual classic of anime, Ginga Eiyu Densetsu, a series based on the novels by Yoshiki Tanaka, which was adapted into a set of OVAs that was released between 1988 and 1997 and spanned 110 episodes. Yes, today we are talking about the legend of the Galactic heroes. While this video was certainly sparked by the new remake, Dinoya Teisei, I think I finally pronounced it right, this video won't be talking about it. It's only going to be talking about the original OVA. Not Gaiden, not the movies, not Dinoya Teisei, just the original OVA. I'll get to all that stuff later on. And if you haven't picked up on this by now, this is a series that, in terms of content, is as large and sprawling as the Nasuverse, only this one is a lot less universe leapy and a lot more chronological, also a lot more easily accessed since it's pretty easy to pick a starting point. Even so, this series is still pretty hard to condense down, but I'm going to have a try at it. Let's start with the basic premise. In the far-flung future of a galaxy not so far, far away, humanity has expanded itself across the Milky Way, and has formed into two major powers and two minor ones. To start off with our major powers, we have the Galactic Empire, an aristocratic dictatorship founded by Rudolf von Goldenbaum. Von Goldenbaum brought the entire galaxy under his sway. He put down the masses, elevated an aristocracy, and generally was quite unpleasant, massacring thousands of people in pursuit of what he saw as good genes and self-deification. His descendants continued his legacy of both self-aggrandizement and abuse of the masses up until the time of Arli Heinessen. Heinessen was a young man who was put to forced labor on a planet in the Altair system, when he came up with the idea that would change history forever. An idea of how to succeed where so many had failed and escape the Galactic Empire. Taking the entire population of a planet with him, he escaped across space to the other end of the galaxy, and there they founded the Free Planets Alliance, our other great power. The Alliance revived democratic principles and spread throughout their half of the galaxy, that is, until they ran into the Galactic Empire again, and thus began a war that has raged for 150 years at the time of our series' beginning. But even space can be impassable, and there are only two corridors that connect the two nations. And one is actually the home of our first minor power, or sort of minor power. The trading outpost known as Fazan. The Fazanese are officially, technically, Galactic Empire citizens whose leader, the Landesherr, Adrian Rubinski, is nothing more than a representative of the Empire. Official technicalities and Fazan have very little to do with each other. In reality, Fazan is an independent trading outpost, benefiting from the war of both sides and somehow managing to keep the peace just long enough to conduct free trade. It's kind of funny, really. Through their quarter, the Fazan quarter, free trade exists, while through the other quarter, the Isolon corridor, the two countries invade each other endlessly. The balance of power between the three is fairly straightforward, and fairly long-standing, so much so that it can and is summed up in percentages. And our story begins with the end of that status quo. I'm going to talk about characters for a little bit now, and to save me jumping around and stuff, I want to start by touching on something overarching with the characters rather than diving right in. And that is that the Legend of the Galactic Heroes has essentially two full casts, one each for the Empire and the Alliance. Each has its protagonist, its supporting lead characters, its secondary characters, a myriad of supporting characters, antagonists, third parties, enough, in short, to stock two full anime. And sure enough, both casts truly have the strength to carry the entire series on their own. Utilizing this fact, there are indeed several arcs that involve just one side or just the other. In fact, the second arc, Capture Vicelon, is solely for the Free Planets Alliance, while the much shorter third arc, Caste Drop Rebellion, focuses entirely on the Empire. And then later on, the coup d'etat arc is entirely in the Alliance, while the Lippstadt War takes place entirely within the Empire. This allows us to do two things. First, it allows us to really get a sense of these castes independently, and get to see their main characters acting as, well, characters, not just as foils for each other, but as individuals in their own right. And secondly, this means that any time where both main characters are in the same arc is incredibly exciting and riveting, and because it's not done all the time, these moments become special. It's an incredibly fascinating approach that really works, and really only works because of the strength of these castes. So let's talk about these castes. First off, let's talk about the Galactic Empire, and its protagonist, the indomitable prodigy, Reinhard von Lohengramm. Reinhard is the scion of a family that's aristocratic in name only. In reality, it's basically broke and has no real social standing. However, when he's 10 years old, his older sister Anne Rose is taken to be a concubine in the current Kaiser's harem, and Reinhard decides to grow up quickly, join the military, and gain power in order to take her back. The combination of his low social standing and the speed with which his intelligence and military brilliance allow him to rise through the military ranks grant him many enemies and the nickname the Golden Brat, or Blonde Brat, depending on the translation. But despite being surrounded by enemies, Reinhard is not alone. He has the only person by his side that matters, at least to him. And that is his best friend in all the world, Siegfried Kirchheis. Kirchheis? God damn it. I've got 4 different pronunciations bouncing around in my head, and I honestly don't know which one's going to come out at any given time. Technically, I begin with the anime, which pronounces it, I think, Kirchheis? Sort of. I'm trying to render the Japanese pronunciation, and I can't quite do it because I don't speak Japanese, but most of the series introduction that I had was through the audiobooks over on Audible, and that meant that I was hearing the pronunciation as Kirchheis. On the other hand, I know a lot of people rendering the name in English pronounce it Kirchheis, and of course, the dub for Die Neue These pronounces it Kirchheis. So, again, what the heck am I supposed to... Well, anyway, it'll be what it'll be. The point is that, like Reinhard, Kirchheis has vowed to take back Anne Rose and see her free, and the two of them rise up the ranks together. Their personalities are very different. Kirchheis is mild-mannered, kind, and altruistic, and he serves as both a moral compass and grounding wire to the haughty, arrogant, sarcastic, rash, and often scathing Reinhard. But despite their differences in personality, the two boys are incredibly fond of each other, and are incredibly close, a relationship which serves as a lot of the emotional core for this side of the series. Beyond them, the next most important member of the Galactic Empire is Hildegard von Mariendorf, or Hilda for short. She is an aristocrat, but unlike her kind, she is fairly sensible and does not really give a damn for aristocratic power. She sees the flaws inherent in the system and is gifted with both military brilliance and common sense far beyond her own class, and so she takes the absolutely unheard of but incredibly sensible route of siding with Reinhard during his inevitable conflicts with the nobility. Beyond Hilda, the most important characters are all commanders serving under Reinhard, most notably the two men collectively known as Reinhard's twin pillars, the heterochromic Admiral Oscar von Ruhenthal and the Gale Wolf Wolfgang Mittermeier. The two are often treated as a set. They are both of the same ranks and of comparable strategic abilities, and in addition, they are also very close friends. This friendship proves to be another emotional core for the series. Yet despite being spoken of so often with one breath, Mittermeier and von Ruhenthal are very, very different people. Mittermeier is much more easygoing, kind, and driven by a very strong moral code. Von Ruhenthal, on the other hand, is a much darker, more twisted character. He's incredibly cynical, calculating, and generally more aloof than Mittermeier, who is the only person that von Ruhenthal ever shows a real affection for. The one other character that I absolutely have to mention from this side of space is Paul von Oberstein. Von Oberstein is, well, the character I hate most in the series, and arguably one of my most hated characters in all of anime. But don't take that the wrong way. Von Oberstein is an excellently written character. He's got some of the strongest and most in-depth writing of the series, and his concept is interesting, and he's well thought out, and on a purely mechanical level, he has everything done right. He isn't a villain either, and yet I hate him. I hate him, and I'm supposed to hate him, because some of the things he does throughout the series leave some of the characters I care about most in very, very bad positions. And yet at the same time, it's impossible not to see the logic behind his actions, and his character has enough follow-through that he isn't doing what he's doing simply to be evil. He's doing it for good reason, and the reasons behind his actions play into a lot of the meta-narrative and psychology within this narrative, which I really can't talk about during this review. That's probably the hardest part of making this video, is trying to boil down Legend of the Galactic Heroes into one review. This video is already going to be like twice the length of a normal review, and that's without me taking all the sidetracks I want to take to talk about the meta-narrative, the psychological implications, the complex playing off between characters, etc, etc, etc. I'm going to be doing some videos on those in future. Normally I'd say if you guys are interested, but honestly, I'm going to be doing some videos on those in future because I'm interested. And there's just so much juicy detail to dive into here. For now though, there is a wealth of other characters I could talk about in the Empire. Most notably Kessler, Muller, and Wittenfeld come to mind, oh, and Merkatz. But I don't have time for any of that, so I'm going to move across the galaxy. Incidentally, see what I'm saying when I say that this really has enough cast for 2 shows. To our other protagonist, the man known variously as Miracle Yang and the Unbeatable Magician, Yang Wenli. Where Reinhardt wanted to be a soldier, Yang decidedly did not. Yang's idea of a life was one that involved studying history, but after his father's death left him without a way to pay for college, he joined the Military Officers Academy as a way to study their history through the History War Department. Unfortunately for him, that department was scrapped and he was forced to transfer. Well, that or leave school, but because leaving before he finished the program would mean a termination of his scholarship and the fact that he'd have to pay back all of his college tuition, Yang didn't have much of a choice, and so off to be a soldier he went. After becoming the hero of the Alpha Seal evacuation 9 years before the series begins, Yang rose up the ranks gradually, thanks to his incredibly brilliant strategic mind. But this brilliance has less to do with the fact that he's a prodigy like Reinhardt and more to do with his study of history. After so much time spent studying history and the way that history repeats itself, Yang starts to pick up on the patterns and starts to see them play out through tactics. Eventually, through more observation, he learns to apply this to the battles unfolding around him, and much to his chagrin finds himself invaluable to his military, unfortunate for him since everything he wants to do involves retirement. Yang himself is far from motivated, lazing around the bridge of his flagship rather than focusing intently the way Reinhardt does, but at the end of the day, they're quite the match for each other, and it's the play between these two characters that keeps the overarching narrative of history moving. But Yang, like Reinhardt, does not carry his cast single-handedly. Our secondary protagonist for Yang's side of space is Julian Mintz, a 14-year-old war orphan who Yang adopted 2 years before the series began. At the series' outset, Julian, a kid of 14, is still a fairly minor character. But as the years pass and the series progresses, oh, I should mention this series takes place over the course of several years. Anyway, as time passes, Julian grows up and grows into his own as a secondary protagonist of that side. And that's one of the things I really love about this series. Time passes and the new generation grows up. Rather than simply pigeonholing Julian into the role of cute kid and Yang's sarcastic emotional cheerleader, we get to see him grow up over the course of the show and come into his own as a character in his own right. That adds to one of the things that makes The Legend of the Galactic Heroes feel like it has so much weight, and that is the sense that history is actually being made. And that's a sense that really comes from the fact that this history doesn't take place in a vacuum. Reinhard and Yang aren't the only two strategic geniuses, and they aren't the only two main characters to have ever existed in this universe. We learn about the old wars between Terra and Sirius. We learn about Terra's Black Flag Force and its 4 main leaders. We learn about the great General Wood, and of course then there's Rudolph von Goldenbaum himself, and the people who succeeded him to the throne. And on the Alliance side of things, there's Lin Pao and Yusuf Toparole, also known as Griping Yusuf, the two who led the infamous or famous, depending on which side of the galaxy you align yourself, Diagon Annihilation. Legend of the Galactic Heroes is incredibly rich with its own history, and by including a character like Julian who grows up over the show's running time, you get the distinct feeling that history is continuing. Reinhard and Yang are far from the first people worth talking about in history, and they are far from the last. All of this gives the series its sense of reality, which is one of the other things that makes it so strong. I'll get to some of the other reasons that this series feels rather realistic in a minute, but for now let me return to the Alliance. Out of the secondary cast of the Alliance, the ones most worth mentioning are first Walter von Schoenkopf. Von Schoenkopf is the leader of the infamous Rosenritter Regiment, a regiment made up of defectors from the Empire and their children. The Rosenritter is filled to bursting with the most skilled ground troops that the Alliance has, but it also has a tendency to betray its side, rather, its commanders do. 6 of its 12 commanders thus far have defected back to the Empire, and so rumor has it that von Schoenkopf, the unlucky 13th, will be number 7. Von Schoenkopf himself is snarky and sarcastic, and is incredibly hard to command. It's hard work being his commanding officer, and Yang's the only one who's been able to live up to it thus far, or rather, put up with him thus far. For any real length of time, he's also got an interesting perspective on things, and is overall a fascinating character. To be fair, that's a description I could apply to like every member of this cast, but anyway. The other notable members are Yang's old upperclassman at officer school, the meticulous Rear Admiral Castlnay, Yang's up-and-coming junior officer, Dusty Attenborough, Yang's aide-de-camp, Frederica Greenhill, who possesses both a photographic memory and a keen intellect for how to use it, the light-hearted pilot, Olivier Poplin, and the old but incredibly perceptive commander, Alexander Bucock. Again, I could go on, but again, I have spent way too long going over characters. The fact is that they're just all so incredibly rich and complex, and that's not even beginning on the Fazan side of things with the Landesherr Adrian Rabinski, known as the Black Fox for his cunning and wily personality, a name he well lives up to. And I haven't even mentioned the 4th side of things, although to be fair, they're far less character-rich. They are the terrorists. Not terrorists, well, I mean they are terrorists, but terrorists. The people of the Church of Terra. Yeah, funny how that phrasing works out. The terrorists are a bit different in that they don't have any strong characters on their side or strong tacticians. What they do have is machinations and strings to pull and fanatics all over the galaxy, ready to pull those strings for them. The terrorists believe that Terra, birthplace of humanity, should be the center of the Empire and of the universe. They are intent on establishing a theocracy with Terra at its heart, and they will stop at nothing to get their way. Plot-wise, this series combines sophisticated military strategy machinations with an equally sophisticated level of interpersonal drama. On the military strategy front, there is just nothing that could have been done better. While there are plenty of characters on both sides of things who are clearly incompetent, there are also plenty of commanders who clearly aren't. And the fact that they are capable of having these full-out battles while neither cast member and neither side holds the idiot ball is what makes the series so good, and does what is probably the best thing about it. It allows you to root for both sides, truly, wholeheartedly, and completely in a way I've never seen before. In some other series that attempt that, you only go so far. For example, Code Geass. Sure, you might love Suzaku as a character, and some of the other Britannian side characters like Yuffie and Cornelia, but at the end of the day, Lelouch is the protagonist, and even if his actions often drip into a moral gray area, He is on the quote-unquote good side, and the Britannians are the evil side, plain and simple. On the other hand, a show like Death Note does make it possible for you to root for either side, but the split isn't exactly even. On one hand, L is the good guy, on the other hand, he's not the protagonist, Light is. So the question is whether you want to root for the good guy or the protagonist. But, again, you know which is which. Here, they are both the protagonist, they are both good, and you want to see them both win. Partially again because of the individual plot lines at their homes. Reinhardt is fighting against this corrupt nobility and aristocracy, and you want to see him take them down. Similarly, Yang is not exactly in a great political climb himself. Sure, the Free Planets Alliance may have started out democratic and fair, but that was a long time ago. It has fallen to corrupt politicians, and Yang is someone who you really want to see deal with them and create a much more fair democratic nation. Even if Yang's goals aren't to become a leader himself, you still want to see him prove successful when combating with these incompetent fools who throw away the lives of civilians to keep themselves in office. You could really make a strong argument for either one to be the protagonist. On one hand, you might argue that Reinhardt is the protagonist. The series begins and ends with Reinhardt, and Reinhardt is introduced first. Therefore, he's the protagonist. Additionally, his actions are the inciting events of the series. On the other hand, you could argue that no, Yang is the protagonist because, at least for the first half of the series, I'm pretty sure that Yang actually gets more screen time. Not only does he solo lead the Isolon arc, which I previously mentioned, but he also then again leads the entire arc that makes up the equivalence of the third book. The arc that ends with Isolon versus Gaiusberg. Yeah, sure. Reinhardt's actions may have been the inciting events for that and for many other things that occur in the series, but after those inciting incidents occur, Reinhardt steps back and it's Yang who takes center stage for most of the story, Yang having several of the climaxes entirely to himself. You could also swing the argument back in favor of Reinhardt by citing a recent interview with series author Yoshiki Tanaka, in which he specifies that when creating the series to begin with, the first thing he conceived of was Reinhardt as a character, and then he created Yang to be a foil. So therefore, Reinhardt was, at least initially, the main character. Additionally, you could also argue Reinhardt's supremacy as protagonist purely on the basis of some, well, more spoilery arguments from later in the series. And yet then again, if you're moving this to an objective level, objectively, Reinhardt is the champion of autocracy and Yang is the champion of democracy, and so by that metric, again, Yang might end up being, if not the protagonist, then a little bit more the hero, which puts him a little bit more protagonistic. I don't know. Again, this is something that you can truly argue either way, and either side can come out feeling like the main character to you depending on who you're rooting for. And you really can root either way, and you really don't know who's going to win at any given time or overall, because again, not only are these two sides comparable in terms of strong characters and moral arguments and focus, they're also comparable in terms of strategic abilities. A fact that gives any and all conflicts between the two sides a huge level of unpredictability, which is incredible to watch, because going into a fight or a battle or a war and not knowing which character is going to come out on top and not knowing who's going to survive it is both highly unusual and absolutely riveting. And speaking of survival, this is where we get to the other reason that this show is so grounded and realistic. The death count. Plot armor is just not a thing. Like, not. Honestly, there are enough major tragic deaths in this series to stock its own top 10 list, and I might do that at some point if I feel like being really depressing. And while some of the deaths are meaningful, a lot of them aren't. Powerful generals don't just die in brave heroic stands. Sometimes they die that way, sure, but sometimes they die because they were hit by flying debris. And this, again, gives the series a sense of true realism and a sense of the essence of mortality. And it also makes the series incredibly unpredictable. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the series also has incredibly strong meta-narrative themes. It looks at history and tackles historical things through its modern sci-fi lens. Of course, this is what sci-fi is known for. One of science fiction's greatest appeals is its speculative fiction workings. Its ability to take things from modern times or recent history and place them in a new realm that's just removed enough and just confined by solid parameters enough to allow us another look at them. And The Legend of the Galactic Heroes is filled to bursting with real-world narratives and meta-narratives and historical commentary and social commentary, and it handles all of it with adroitness and maturity that really develops those topics, but also does not allow the need to develop those topics to impede the progression of a fast-paced, complex, and detailed plotline. And now, I've gone a long time without talking about it, so let's get a few minutes on the animation. It is, well, I'm kind of on two minds on the animation. On one hand, from an objective perspective, it is of an incredibly high caliber. It's pretty damn obvious that a lot of time and effort went into this animation, and the results were, again, objectively absolutely stunning. I say objectively because subjectively, I and many other modern viewers first getting into this show might have some problems with it. Mainly its age. Beautiful or not, it's a lot more stills and a lot less movement and a lot less polished than what we're used to today. No matter how much time I spend raving about this show, and that's what I've been doing for the last, 25 minutes now, there are a lot of people who aren't going to want to pick it up because, well, the animation is really damn old. And honestly, a few months ago, I would have been among them. If I hadn't picked up the first few episodes of Dinoya Teisei, gotten interested, found the books, and then read my way voraciously through the novels, I would never have picked up the OVA. But I fell in love with the novels, and I needed to know what happened next, and the next novel isn't getting translated till August, and no way in hell was I waiting that long. And I'm really glad I picked it up because the OVA has a lot to recommend it in and of its own right, as well as being an incredibly well done adaptation of the source material. Overall, I'd say it's a course of adjustment. You'll get used to it. It'll take a few episodes, but you will get used to the animation, and when you do, the story will be so strong that it won't matter. Opening and ending wise, the openings and endings don't really hold up well to modern fare, but they do have a sort of soft place in my heart at this point. That is, except for I believe it's the third ending. That one deserves its own video dissecting its levels of cinematic brilliance. Now to sum up, there are a lot of reasons why someone wouldn't watch The Legend of the Galactic Heroes. It's 110 episodes long, which makes it quite the commitment, especially since some of those episodes are 25, 26, and even 27 minutes long. Its older art style and animation, and its high rate of stills, is also pretty hard for a modern audience to get into. And it's also a very, very dense, complicated show, so it's not one you can watch just for light entertainment. But that said, despite all of those things, this is a show that you should watch. If you're into dense character drama, if you're into war stories, if you're into strategy, if you're into science fiction, if you're into speculative fiction, this is a story you should watch. This is absolutely one of the best anime I've ever seen, and as such, I can't fail to give it a 6 out of a possible 5 stars, a rating I give to anime that I believe are essentially flawless, and out of all the anime I've reviewed thus far, there are none that deserve that evaluation and that 6th star anywhere near as much as this one. So next up, alternate anime recommendations. Damn all, now I have to think of some. Well, of course there's the previously mentioned Code Geass. While not as deep and intricate as this story, Code Geass is still a highly entertaining, fast-paced, sci-fi military strategy series that shows us multiple perspectives surrounding a single war. My second and most obvious recommendation goes to a new readaptation of another work by Yoshiki Tanaka, the original author of Legend of the Galactic Heroes, and that is The Heroic Legend of Arslan. And while I typically do 3 recommendations. I'm going to stop at 2 for now to give me some other things to recommend when I talk about other parts of this series, because yeah, that's what I'm doing. When it wraps, I will absolutely be doing a review of LOTGH, and I'm also going to be doing reviews of the 2 seasons of Legend of the Galactic Heroes Gaiden, 100 Million Lights, 100 Million Stars, and Spiritual Labyrinth, as well as of the movies. So if you want to catch those as they come out, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. While I swear that this isn't the only thing I'm going to be talking about in the near future, I do have a hell of a lot to say about this series, and so I have several more videos planned in the near future. If, however, you want to hear me talk more about this series right away, along with a lot of other battle strategy anime, go over to my channel and check out my Top 10 Battles of Anime video. And if you want to hear my thoughts in the beginning of LOTGH, check out my video on my top 10 anime and recommendations of spring 2018. Please like if you enjoyed this video, and in the comments I'd actually rather like to hear whether you rooted for Reinhardt or Yang, or whether you're about as able to make up your mind as I am, that is not at all. And also, who is your favorite character? Besides this main 2, I mean. If we're not including them and not including the other 2 leads, I'm probably going with Von Ruenthal, but you know, it's hard. And now I believe this video is the longest I have ever made, and so I really need to stop here. This is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching. L. Psi Congru.